This is the Comics Alternative Interviews, a conversation with Sonny Liew. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews. I'm Derek.
And I'm Gwen, and we're two people with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this episode, we have the pleasure of talking with Sonny Liew. His new book, The Art of Charlie Chang Hock, Chye, just came out from Pantheon Books. But before we get into that interview, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Interviews is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those prices can be 20 to 35% off cover price at DCB Service. And every single month, you're going to find some wonderful, unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price. Sometimes they're going to be at 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that go even higher than that.
That's right, Derek. There's a couple of really good discounts that I want our listeners to know about, especially if they listen today and really get excited about Sonny Liew's work. It's possible to get other titles that he's either created or illustrated for really good savings at Discount Comic Book Service. For instance, probably the work that you and I know the best, Malinky Robot, which is a great collection of stories, is currently available for just $10.19. But also Shadow Hero, which is his collaboration with Gene Luen Yang, is just for the low price of $12.59, both substantial savings. So if you listen today and you want to get more of Sonny's work, you can get that there. And then In Stock Trades, the sister company of Discount Comic Book Service, has Sense and Sensibility, which is a comic that Sonny Liew illustrated. And for those of you like me who follow the wonders of Jane Austen well beyond the 19th century, you'll be able to see a beautifully illustrated comic of Sense and Sensibility. So there's a lot of great values out there.
That's right. So make sure you go to the website of Discount Comic Book Service, dcbservice.com, because they're going to take care of all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, Sonny Liew and otherwise, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Gwen and Derek sent you.
That's right. And you know, Derek, when I'm reading my comics, there's nothing that is better than having a little caffeine like, coffee, chocolate, tea.
And Gwen, where do you think people can find really good coffee, chocolate, and tea?
You mean like 100% fair trade, shade-grown, organic certified coffee, Derek?
That's what I'm talking about.
All right. Well, I think they can go to Just Coffee Co-op. Their coffee is roasted in small batches, there's no mass production, and it's made to order, and there's no minimum order.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Yeah, this is really a good place to get coffee, and not only do they have a lot of different kinds of coffee, tea, and chocolate, but it's also a company that is very socially conscious. Just Coffee Co-op is a worker cooperative, and what that means is that its workers are the owners, and they also partner with On the Ground to raise money and awareness for sustainable community development in farming regions around the world. Now, as Gwen said, you can go to their website, which is justcoffee.coop. That's justcoffee, one word, .coop. And upon checkout, be sure to use the coupon code COMICS, COMICS. That is our coupon code. You will get 10% off of your order, and you'll be helping out the Comics Alternative. That's Just Coffee Co-op. It's a great place to get caffeinated. So, there you go. In fact, Gwen, I have to congratulate you. That was an incredible transition from Discount Comic Book Service into Just Coffee Co-op, the two sponsors of this episode of the Comics Alternative.
Yes, I'm practicing. I've been watching a lot of back episodes of Mad Men, so...
Oh. That's a great show. But another great narrative is The Art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye. This book comes out on March 1st, which is actually today as we're recording this. This is an incredible book. And I'm glad that we got Sonny on the show to talk about it.
We are so lucky. It's so good that when I read it this week, I already have added it to the comics course that I'm teaching in the fall. I think our listeners are going to find from our interview and from reading the book themselves what an amazing contribution this makes to comics texts. I can't say enough positive things about it.
Yeah. And, I mentioned this during our interview, but how I came to be introduced to Sonny is, I guess about 2 years ago, Andy Kunka and I did an interview with Jean Louis Yang right at the publication of The Shadow Hero. And for those who know of The Shadow Hero, it was illustrated by Sonny Liew. And right after we published that interview, Sonny emailed me directly and said, "Thanks for interviewing Jean. You guys did a great job. It was a lot of fun." And so I responded back to Sonny, glad you liked it. Thanks for touching base. Next time you have something coming out, let us know and maybe we can have you on the podcast. And then he said, interesting that you should say that because, and he was telling me about this new project that he was working on. He was finishing up the drafts at the time. And he asked me if I would be interested in reading a proof, and he wanted my take on it. And it turned out to be The Art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye. And so he sent it to me. I read it, and I was bowled away by it. In fact, also, as I mentioned in the interview, I thought that maybe Chan was actually a real historical figure. And so he wanted my take on the book, how it was put together, the perspectives, and I think he was interested in the fact that I was fooled into thinking that Chan was actually a historical figure. And then he asked me to write a blurb for the book. Now, my blurb did appear in the Singapore edition of The Art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye, but not in the U.S. edition that's just come out, unfortunately.
But you're so well known in Singapore, Derek.
Yeah. Hey, if I'm going to be known anywhere, why not Singapore?
That's right.
Although the blurb is credited not to me personally, but to the Comics Alternative.
Oh, okay.
So, that's something, though.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But we did have a great interview with Sonny. So, Gwen, without further ado, why don't we let our listeners hear what we discussed?
Sounds like a plan.
We're pleased to have on the Comics Alternative Sonny Liew. The new book, The Art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye, is coming out today as we record this, in fact, from Pantheon Books. Sonny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Hi, Derek. Hi, Gwen. Yep.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. And, we should mention to the listeners that we are doing this from quite a distance because Sonny right now, you live in Singapore, and later on this spring you're going to be touring the United States. But right now you're in Singapore, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. So, we had to coordinate the time, and right now it is evening in Singapore. It is morning here on the east coast of the United States. So as we're recording this, we're going to carry you into the next day.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, this is definitely not your first book, but this is quite a departure from your earlier comics, the stuff that you've illustrated, and definitely the stuff that you've written as well. And so, I'm wondering if you can introduce to our listeners what The Art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye is all about.
Well, it isn't. I mean, to go backwards a bit, I think there are parts of it which are parts of what I've done in the past, which are also a little bit experimental in terms of the form. So I think there is some continuity between, let's say, Mannequin Robot and this story. But the book is essentially about a sort of a biography about a comic book artist from Singapore. But it's also kind of like an art book and a book about Singapore as a country, its history as well. So it's to me, it's several different genres and forms kind of mixed together to tell a story. Yeah. Mm.
And, I think it is that mashup of genres that you just referenced that led me to see this as very different from the work that you've done before. Because Gwen and I were talking right before we brought you into the conversation about how this book, in many ways, is all over the place. It's like, what angle or what facet should we begin talking about first? Your work as an artist, the history of Singapore, the fact that this is written, partly in an autobiographical or a biographical mode. So, there are just so many things that you're doing here.
Yeah, I think that was one of the challenges. I was conscious that it was, in a way, sort of a fractured narrative. So the challenge was really to make sure that the book kind of was still readable as a linear narrative, despite the kind of fracturing of different forms and styles. So, yeah, I'm not sure where to begin talking about it. I guess I'll leave it to you guys too.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would love you to talk a little bit about are the different techniques that you used. There's so many archival materials that are included in the text, such as the comics that Chan creates across time, and that in a way become a documentary on Singapore history. So if you could talk just a little bit about the techniques. For instance, one of the things that I really loved was, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the cartoon called Bukit Chapalang.
Bukit Chapalang, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you might just talk about that, I'm sure our readers would be really interested to understand the historical context behind it, and then how you chose to set it up in the comic itself.
I'm a little bit lost. Are you talking about how it was done technically, or in terms of?
I'm really interested to know both your decisions technically, but also what you hoped it would do in the comic itself.
Well, in terms of technique, it was. I think it's a lot of it's digital work. These days with Photoshop, you can do layering and bring in textures and different kind of coloring techniques that you can kind of replicate what old comics used to look like, just using digital tools. So, and if you look up Google, you find a whole bunch of tutorials on how to make your comics look as if they were done in the 1950s or 30s or 60s. So, I kind of just looked that up and experimented with different kind of papers to give the look of old comics. In terms of the narrative, I guess I was really trying to keep sort of the reader involved in the story. And given how much ground I think this book covers in terms of history, I figured it'd be interesting to kind of use different comic book forms, like in different parts of the book, to tell the story. And part of the challenge was in trying to figure out which parts of the story went with what kind of comics, and there isn't really any kind of I would say strict rules for deciding. A lot of it's just gut instinct, trying to figure out what fit what section.
But it does a nice job though of showing how useful comics can be for political allegory.
Yeah. I mean, the reason why I did the book in this form in the first place is when I was reading. I think that the first spark was actually reading books about comics, right? So I was reading this book called I can't remember what it's called. I think it's History of Comics, Graphics, and Graphic Novels by Roger Sabine or Sabine. The book, right? So when I was reading that, it kind of what came across to me was that in explaining comics, you have to kind of talk about the history of the country it was in. So, like for example, in the US, Robert Crumb's comics and how it related to the 1960s cultural revolution, countercultural revolution, or why certain comics became popular in the post World War II era. So, in that sense, it felt like to understand comics, you could understand history. And in this book, I I think the idea was to kind of flip that around, to kind of explain history through a history of comics. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and part of the history of comics is embedded in the very fact that you vary the style throughout. So, for instance, we were talking about Bukit Chapalang, and anyone who is looking at this who knows anything about comics history will immediately think of Walt Kelly's Pogo. But there are a variety of other styles that you emulate here. I mean, you take several pages from the EC war comics from the 1950s, Mad Magazine, The Dark Knight Returns as well. And so one of the things I find fascinating, you were talking about this as kind of a fragmented, almost pastiche kind of work where you're bringing in a lot of different genres. You're also bringing in a variety of different styles. And I think that it would be easy for a reader to look at this and see that there is more than one artist whose work is creating this book, not Sonny Liew, who is the grand artist master behind everything, creating a variety of different styles to make it look like it's almost like a collection of different works.
Right. I mean, that was kind of part of the rationale behind the whole story, right? So I think at one point I wondered whether I should make the sort of the fact that Charlie Chan wasn't real more obvious in the book. To kind of let the reader know that it was kind of a fictional character somewhere in the book. Like, you kind of switch from being a fake biography to letting them in on the joke. But in the end, I think I figured that trying to keep it real, and force a kind of discipline on the story, it kind of force you to, it's, in a way you could say it's an arbitrary rule, but, having that kind of gave the book a bit of grounding. I think that it needed to stay coherent,
And in fact,
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And you mentioned this being a false biography. I remember when I read this, when you had it in draft form, you sent it to me about a year and a half ago for my commentary. I actually took you at your word that this was actually, the Chan was actually a historical figure. And the reason I didn't know about him was for the reasons that you point out at the book, that he really isn't really world famous, but he's, fairly well known in Singapore. And so I took you at your word, and I was fooled, and I thought, wow, I mean, you did a really good job of creating the veneer of biography. And so I think that, we've been talking about your work as different kinds of genres put together, but also I think the kind of mock biography form is another that we can throw into the mix. Now, given that you're writing about a character who, is a fiction, how did this idea come about? I mean, why did you decide to write about the material that you're writing about in this book through this fictionalized creator, but at the same time do it to where you yourself, as Sonny Liew who makes appearances in this book, tells this story? I mean, what's the genesis of the art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye?
Well, like I said, the initial spark was books like similar to what Roger Sabin did, or any of the art books out there, out of Harry Kurtzman, out of Jack Kirby. So that was the initial form that I think I was going for. Like, so you would have little extracts from the artwork, and have all these essays in between to explain the background. But I think what I realized kind of pretty early on was that the books that I own, like the art of Jack Kirby, I never read them in a kind of linear fashion, right? I would always read them. They are essentially coffee table books that you read in a very haphazard manner, for me at least. Like, I'll pick it up and I would, flip to the middle and start reading. So I mean, is that how you guys read out of books, or did you guys always read it from beginning to end?
Oh, I don't read it from beginning to end. Coffee table books, at least.
Yeah.
I read from beginning to end. I'm boring that way.
Okay. Well, just based on my own experience, right? That I very seldom did that. So I figured that I needed to find a way to make a reader read the book in a linear fashion, and that became so. So I kind of went. Let me see. I fell back on what Scott McCloud did in Understanding Comics, which was to turn essays into comic book form, in a sense. When I first read that book, it was it felt like a really obvious thing to do, but he was kind of the first comic theorist to write a book about comics through comics, and I think that was the genius idea that he had, and that's what made that book so accessible, right? So I kind of just stole the idea for Charlie Chan in a sense to make it more of a linear reading experience in my mind, at least. Yeah. Mm.
You were talking earlier about the coffee table book genesis of your current book. Had you thought at any point that maybe you would publish this something like a coffee table book, a larger format? Yeah, I mean, the initial idea was to do it to make it a hardcover, to make it really big, and just like a out of book. But a lot of real world constraints quickly appeared. Like the publisher in Singapore didn't want to do a big book. Like it would cost too much, and yeah. So there were like real world constraints that kind of made that impractical, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Well, Sonny, one of the things that I really enjoyed about this book, speaking about the artist and the genesis of an artist, is that throughout the text, Chan has a conflict with a lot of the adults early on in his life, especially his family, about his, his art versus their desire for him to have enough money to live comfortably. Could you talk just a little bit about the idea of that tension between being a good son and being a great artist that plays out in this?
I think that unless you're making a lot of money as an artist, that's always going to be a concern. I think comic creators everywhere have always worried a little bit about careers and money and how to make comics a sustainable career. I think it's certainly something that I still worry about all the time. So. And you read about someone like, let's say, Jack Kirby or Wally Wood, you see the same kind of trajectory where even if you're already really successful in the beginning of a career, there's a good chance that later on there'll be financial troubles and everything else. So I think in that sense, I felt like it was in a way almost a universal experience for a lot of comic creators. And it made sense that Charlie Chan would have sort of a similar struggle in his life.
It's interesting because this text reminds me a little bit of Joyce's A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. There's a couple of moments, like the moment when Chan is a young man on the bus and he's hoping that a young woman will enjoy his art, but it's clear that she's really interested in more superficial things, but he's still okay with that. He's sort of out there looking for his muse. So there's ways in which this idea is universal across text, but I thought it was beautifully conveyed in your comic.
Oh, thank you. I don't think I've ever read Joyce, that book by Joyce, though. Be honest.
I think you'd like it, just based on what you've done here. I saw a lot of similarities, actually. So,
okay, I'm going to check it out then.
And I hadn't thought of that before, Gwen, but you're right. In some ways, this book reads like a type of Künstlerroman, an artist's growth story, although you're doing it through the lens of, the presenter, yourself, Sonny Liew, telling the story about this historical figure that never really existed, which is an interesting twist on the Künstlerroman. But this leads me to another question, Sonny, and that is how much of your own story, your own personal history, is invested in the character of Chan?
I mean, there are definitely bits in there, but I've never really analyzed how much of it is in there. Like I think the experience he had at Comic-Con is a little bit based on my own experiences where, you go to a table and you show your work and, the person doesn't really respond to it. I think that's sort of biographical, but it's a whole mismatch. I read a lot of books on other artists. I've read interviews, and so it's I wouldn't be able to kind of exactly figure out how much of it was autobiographical and how much is based on the lives of other artists.
Well, we've been talking about this as a mock biography and also as a personal story, but as we've mentioned earlier, this is also a historical work, and I have to say, and I think Gwen is coming from the same perspective as well, I was almost completely ignorant of Singapore's history before coming to this book. And one of the things about reading The Art of Charlie Chen, Hock Chye, is that it forced me to do some research and look into the history of Singapore. I mean, in particular, the historical figures of Lee Kuan Yew and Lim Chin Siong, am I pronouncing that correct?
Siong, yeah.
And now these are important figures in Singapore history. You can definitely get that from your book. And they become, I guess, one of the central components of this new book. And you map this out from the very beginning, because we get an introduction to both of these guys in the end papers of the book, which is usually not that end papers usually isn't a place where an author inserts critically important material. In other words, information that you'll need to understand what happens in the book. But you do that at the very beginning. Someone opens up your book and they see this I guess we could call it a 2-page spread, One Mountain Cannot Abide, Two Tigers, where you introduce us to these two historical figures. Where did you know from the beginning that you wanted to bring them into your story as well?
Yeah. I mean, Lee Kuan Yew was an obvious choice in the sense that he was like a prime minister for a long time in Singapore. Like he was and is still the most dominant figure in Singaporean history and politics. And I think Chin Siong was also an obvious choice in a way, because once started doing a research, it became clear that he was someone who was a lot better known back in the 60s and 50s, and has kind of been sort of, in a way, semi-erased in official narratives of history in Singapore. And I think that's what made it really interesting for me to kind of try to tell the story that's been a little bit lost, I think, in the official narratives. And I think the main decision really was to kind of focus on the two of them, as opposed to a lot of the other people who were also involved in the history of the time. And and I kind of went back and forth a lot, because you kind of worry that you're leaving out a lot of people who played important roles in history. But again, it was I think it all ties back to kind of trying to make the narrative flow, make it readable. So just focusing on two main characters made it I think a lot easier to handle than trying to keep every single player in the book. If that makes.
And these two figures become major players in almost every part of the book. We were mentioning earlier the way that you bring in a variety of different styles, and you allude to other comics, like, for instance, Kelly's Pogo. And one of the things that I found most striking in the book, and this is toward the end, the part titled Days of August, which is, Chan's alternate history of Singapore. And it seems as if this is where you're giving Siong his fair due. In other words, you're paying homage to a man that, from what you just said, is forgotten by many in Singapore today.
Well, yes and no. I mean, that part of it was... I think I was trying to imagine a different history to what happened, but also at the same time questioning sort of the alternative histories. Like it's easy to speculate what could have happened, but I think the point that Strip tried to make, or that part of the story tried to make, is that what happened did happen, and it's in a sense, I wouldn't say futile to imagine alternatives, but it's in the end you still have to live with what really happened. I think that was kind of more the point than to give him sort of a kind of to give Chin Seong his place in history. I think that it was more to kind of question how we look at history rather than to give Chin Seong sort of his how to describe this, his credit in history or something like that.
Yeah. And and I don't want to give anything away about the ending of that particular story, Days of August, because it does appear toward the very end of the book. In fact, it's the last part before we get to the epilogue. But maybe because it was toward the very end of the book, it just struck me as one of the most powerful segments of the book, because it ends on kind of a somber note. I mean, not sad, but it's probably one of the most pensive parts of the entire book for me.
Yeah, I guess that was intentional. I guess. I mean, part of the problem or part of the challenge was to kind of figure out how to tie things together at the end. Given how kind of scattered the book was, and I'm not sure how exactly it came about, but once I thought of the idea of kind of playing with like time travel and sort of dimensional jumping to different dimensions, it just kind of made sense to me at the time to that this would be how the book should end, like how things would eventually tie together.
Now, the character, the historical character of Lee Kuan Yew, he died last year, didn't he?
Yeah, just before the book came out, actually.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask you, what was that experience like? I mean, here you are writing about a historical figure, and in the process of creating this story and then publishing it last year in Singapore, this figure dies. What was that like?
It was kind of strange because while I was doing the book, it was I mean, Lee Kuan Yew had kind of been sort of his health had been declining for a couple of years now. So it was kind of clear that he wouldn't, last too much longer. So I was always a little worried, like, I mean, obviously just for his health in general, but also in terms of the book and how we would kind of pitch the ending, because having him alive, having him not be alive did affect how you kind of wrote about him to some degree, So, it was always sort of a question I had in my mind until he really did pass away, and that, I guess, clarified things a little more in terms of what the book needed to be. Yeah. But yeah, when he passed away, there was a huge outpouring of grief in Singapore. It was like, it was the TV would play kind of his passing his story, 24 hours a day for at least a week. So it was a big event in Singapore. And
now I know that you sent me the Singapore edition of this book. I happen to have that back in Texas. I don't have it with me right now. But was the pub date of that book before his death? After, okay, because I couldn't remember that, and I was wondering if you had to make any changes in the English edition, because I know that the first page we get in the epilogue, this oil painting, this mock oil painting from Chan, it does note that Lee Kuan Yew died. But you had that before the death.
That was in the Singapore edition, yeah.
I'm sorry, what now?
Yeah, that was in the Singapore edition because it was after his passing.
Okay, so you got that in, right after he died.
I think the book came out at the right time in a sense. Like, it wasn't planned, but it came out several months after Lee Kuan Yew had passed. And I say it's fortunate, or it was good timing, just in the sense that the book is a little bit critical of sort of the whole PAP regime and sort of the PAP's version of history. And I think right after his death, like the weeks or days after that, I think people were really sensitive about any sort of criticism about Lee Kuan Yew. So like I mentioned, I think there was a teenager called Amos Yee who posted a video on YouTube criticizing him just right after he had passed away, and he got a lot of flack for that. He was actually arrested and put in jail for a couple of days.
Oh, wow.
Because of that. And so I think the book came out several months later when things had kind of died down, which I think made it a little less sensitive, I think, in general.
What did you get any, or was there much commentary about the fact that you had published a book about him soon after his death, or partly about him?
No, I mean the big controversy here was really more about the grant that the book had received, and was then subsequently withdrawn when the book came out. Mm-hmm. So most of the commentary was about that, about sort of the arts in Singapore and whether the government should support books that they didn't quite agree with. In a sense, yeah.
Well, in fact, I think this book is a very political book. That at least on first reading, one may not think that that's the case. But I, at least the second time I read it, I felt that this was much more politically engaged than my initial impression was. I mean, do you feel that this is as a creator, that this was a very political work for you? Well,
in the sense that it examines history, I think you can't really avoid politics in that sense, because then those two things are really tied together. But I kind of think of it more as a look at history rather than politics myself.
Sonny, there's a comic that you have in the middle of the text called Trust that I thought was very beautifully done. Could you discuss the sort of genesis of that particular comic? Because I think it does dovetail nicely with what you just said about history and the way that it shapes a person.
I'm trying to remember it. One problem is that the book came out almost like a year plus now in Singapore, so I've trouble remembering all parts of it.
Basically, it's the idea that a variety of different rulers come in and make promises that they break. Mm-hmm. And I think you were sort of talking about the just everyman citizen and how sort of that makes that person feel.
Well, that comic, I think, was mostly I was trying to kind of do a pastiche of what Harry Kurtzman did in his stories, right? For Twisted Tales and all the war comics. So I was trying to follow a sort of structure that he would use. At the same time, try to insert into the story sort of the Second World War experience of Singaporeans here. So I'm not quite clear how it ties in with. Let me think about it. Yeah. So I mean, how do you guys see that linking up with Lee Kuan Yew in that sense, or the Singapore history?
Well, to me, it very much showed the way that, and Derek, you may have another take on this, but to me, it was a beautiful sort of commentary on even the figure of the artist in society, how very often their art may go from being something that's supported by the culture to something that's derided by the culture, depending upon the way that things are going politically. And so, I sort of saw that as being sort of what that was doing. Derek, I don't know if that was what you saw too.
To a point, I think first and foremost, when I read, Trust, I thought of it as an example of, Kurtzman, something like you may find in Two-Fisted Tales. And in that sense, it had a very allegorical feel to it. Yeah. And I think on the one hand, you could look at the political allegory as specifically pointed toward Singapore's history. But in a larger sense, it could deal with any geographic region's history when it comes to politics, war, that these are the same stories that seem to be told time and time again, that, certain factions, certain ideologies, certain nations appear to have the answer to certain problems. But when it comes right down to it, many times the decisions are made for very nationalistic or even sometimes very selfish reasons. And so, but again, those are the kind of stories that Kurtzman used to tell in his old EC War comics. And, so I thought of it as not only as an example of that, but also fitting into the larger themes that we've been discussing in The Art of Charlie Chan, Hock, Chye.
Right. I get a sense that we're making the book sound really serious and heavy. I think a lot of what I was trying to do was to make it feel, despite all the facts and all the historical stuff, to make it feel like a fun read, and I think, the comic strips, the different styles, there was a lot of it was trying to keep the narrative feel light, even though it wasn't, even though the content and the facts were kind of heavy.
Yeah, and I think you really succeeded in that. I mean, I agree now that I think about it, the way my line of questioning has gone, it seems that way. It was an amazing read. It's beautiful. It's funny. I was telling Derek before we started interviewing you that I'm going to teach this in the fall in my introduction to comics class, because it's a history of comics, but it's also a comic that shows a very specific history. But as Derek was saying, it feels very universal at the same time.
Oh, thank you. What I actually did was I would line up sort of events in Singapore history on one side on a piece of whiteboard, and then I would kind of list down comics of history on the other side and try to see what could match what era, what event. So like Kurtzman in the 50s would match up with the what Charlie Chan was doing at the same time, and I guess the whole Gekika movement in manga would happen 10 years later, and then that was kind of fun, to just kind of figure out, because I love old comics. I love the smell, the feel of old comics, and this book was kind of a way to celebrate that, just how comics, old comics felt and looked. Yeah.
And I like the way that you did pair up what was going on in your story with actual real-world events. And so we could hang those on some kind of timeline, even if it's kind of a loose timeline. And the interesting thing about this is that when I was going back preparing for this interview, rereading your book, I was also reading at the same time, and for the very first time, Tatsumi's A Drifting Life. And, he does the exact same thing in telling his own story, because it's, an autobiography, a thinly veiled autobiography. He also includes a lot of these historical and cultural markers, so the reader can get a sense of what was happening politically, culturally, at a specific time that his character, Katsumi, is living his life.
Yeah, Drifting Life was definitely one of the influences on this book. I read that along, I think, with Lat's Town Boy and Kampong Boy. That Lat is a really famous Malaysian cartoonist. I'm not sure if you've heard of him. Lat, Lat. Yeah, so I think even in Lat's book, like he would tell the story of his life, but he would also contextualize it within Malaysian history and what's happening in the world at the time. So there was definitely a conscious, gambit that I took in the narrative. Yeah.
And, it's interesting, the questions that Gwen and I are asking, and then your response a little while ago about the, kind of the sheer enjoyment and the humor in this book. It strikes me that it's interesting that, here we are, Gwen and I are both comic scholars, and we're looking at this as, this serious, important work. And you're responding as the creator, hey, I'm just having a good time, and I want people to get a lot of fun out of this. And so, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't want people listening to the podcast to think that this book is all about history and that they wouldn't enjoy reading it.
No, this is definitely not Khan's critique of pure reason. So this is definitely enjoyable.
I want to encourage our readers too, to our listeners, to know that I came into this with not a lot of knowledge about this part of the world and history. And Derek was saying, I still felt the context was there. The humor was there. The story was very engaged. And even though there's this pastiche of different types of comics form coming together, it's sewn together well. So the story reads very well. I just couldn't believe how much I loved this book when I started reading it. So, don't worry. It is wonderful to read. It's so engaging. And I feel like I've learned a lot too. Of course, I really love history. I'm a nerd, but that's all right.
Well, Sonny, we've been talking almost entirely about the art of Charlie Chan Hock Chye, but, you've got another side to your work right now, currently, and that is as the illustrator of Dr. Fate for DC. How is it kind of bridging those two worlds? The world of your current book that just came out, which is your creator-owned stuff, and then working with one of DC's properties.
Well, I think the biggest impact that one book had on the other was just in terms of scheduling. Because Charlie Chye, I was supposed to have finished in, I think, I want to say July 2014, and it kept getting pushed back. It went to November, and then it went to March, April. So, but by the time I started Dr. Fate, we were 5 weeks from publication of that comic. So, it's just been really tricky trying to finish a book every month without having any kind of buffer zone for, to do the book. So in that sense, it's been a real challenge to meet the deadlines for Dr. Fate.
Now, you've done series before. You illustrated Wonderland, for example. But this is the first time, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but is this the first time that you have worked on an ongoing monthly series?
Yeah, that's right. I've done work for like Marvel and DC Vertigo, but those were mini series, right? So they were like 4 or 5 issues. Whereas this one is potentially could go on for a much longer time. Yeah.
Yes, you did Sense and Sensibility, which I love. So that was absolutely. What was that experience like?
I enjoyed it at the time. I think looking back at it, I feel like with books like this, I always feel like I wish I had more time to make the art better. To make everything better. With a sort of a deadline hanging over you, you kind of when you cut corners sometimes, you rush through certain things that you look back and wish you had taken more time on, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so what's the story behind you being the artist on Dr. Fate? How did this come about? Who contacted you? Was it Paul Levitz who reached out to you? Was it an editor at DC?
It was Paul, because Paul had come to Singapore, I think, for the Comic-Con here, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. And we kind of talked a little bit and sort of kept in touch through email. So I think he had seen The Shadow Hero with Gene Yang, and I think that book kind of made him think that maybe I could do a superhero book, So I think he kind of mentioned my name to the DC editors, and they thought it was a possible idea to kind of pursue.
So in many ways, the Shadow Hero was kind of your entryway into Dr. Fate.
That's right. Yep. Very much so, actually.
Do you find that your work with Gene Yang has opened other doors as well?
I'm not quite sure yet. Since Shadow Hero, I've done Charlie Chan and I've done Dr. Fate, but I'm not quite sure what else the future holds. So it's a little bit too early to know that, I think.
And and one of the reasons why I'm asking that is, I was aware of your work before The Shadow Hero, but I wouldn't have known. I didn't know Sonny Liew. In other words, I recognized the art. I knew it in Wonderland. I even had a couple of issues of Malinky Robot. But when I picked up a couple of years ago, because I guess it has been about 2 years ago, The Shadow Hero, I thought, this is really interesting. I've got to check this artist out. Unbeknownst to me, I already knew your work. And so when I started to go back through my own comics, I go, oh, this is the guy who did Malinky Robot. This is the guy who illustrated Wonderland. So, I mean, that gave me a sense of who you were, having read The Shadow Hero. And then one of the reasons I really attended to that is because I'm a big fan of Gene Yang. And then, of course, as you know, Sonny, we had Gene on the podcast, which is how you actually were introduced to me, because you reached out to congratulate us on that interview, and then the rest is history.
Mm-hmm. Wait, what was the question here?
No, it was more of an observation than a question, because because of The Shadow Hero, I mean, I felt that was my real introduction to your work, even though I had read your work previously.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I was very conscious when I did a project that I'll be, in a sense, writing on Gene's coattails, because I mean he's really well known because American Born Chinese and all his other books. So it was a project that I knew would give me more exposure when I did it. So it was, a very conscious decision in that sense. To kind of, I mean, every time I did a book in the past, like, Wonderland and, Malinky Robot, I would think that would be the book to kind of, make this career more viable, but it's never quite happened in the past, I think. And, so it's always been a challenge for me. I've always wondered, whether I would be able to, make a real career out of this comic business. It's tough. Every time you put a book out, you know that there are like 100 other books out there. And, I'm still looking for the right formula, the right approach to making this a viable career, I think.
But I find it really interesting that the way that plays out in this comic, though, because you have, Chan, who for his entire life, for the most part, tries constantly to answer that question by, holding up the idea of sort of the devotion to art. But you have his former writing partner who, talks about his political and social choices being based upon more practical concerns. That's sort of why I was asking about that earlier, because it sounds like it's something that you think about a lot yourself, understandably.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I have friends who are, in different careers, like they banking or engineers, and a lot of it just seems so much more stable. The financial rewards are greater, and it's you can raise a family, you can buy a house. Doing comics it's a much more sort of risky proposition. So it's
you're talking to two English professors, so we kind of know what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, we're all underpaid. I feel it's at some level. I was talking to Gene about this actually the last time I saw him in the US, and he was saying that if you're a fairly good engineer, you can make a really decent living, but if you're a fairly good comic artist or writer, it's sort of on a different scale. It's a whole, you're much lower down on the food chain, I think.
Well, now that I think about it, your work with Gene Yang in Shadow Hero, okay, so The Shadow Hero in many ways is based on an actual real life superhero called the Green Turtle that, you and Gene created this fictional work that springs from that. And that's not that different in some ways than in what you're doing with the art of Charlie Chan Hock Chye, in that you're using historical circumstances to create, in essence, is a work of fiction, but a work of fiction that in certain ways is masked as a biography. So there's some real interesting things going on between the fiction and nonfiction side of narrative. Did were you working on Charlie Chan Hock Chye when you were also talking with Gene about Shadow Hero, or when you were finalizing your work on that book?
I think I was starting to do research on Charlie Chan whilst working on Shadow Hero. I'm not sure how much. I think there was a lot of sort of causal effect between the two, in the sense that Gene had already had a script done by the time. So my role was just to kind of flesh it out in the drawings. I didn't really play a big role in the sort of structural storytelling part of it, in that sense.
Now, can we expect a sequel to the Shadow Hero?
Or
can you tell us? Can you tell us? I mean,
well, me and Gene both want to, I think, but it's a kind of matter of scheduling, right? Right after Shadow Hero, he went on Superman. I kind of signed up for Dr. Fate, and now I think he's doing other books as well. So it's a matter of finding the right time and place, I think, because we definitely both want to do it. It's just trying to figure out the right time, I think.
Yeah. I think I remember from when we interviewed him a couple of years ago that he had insinuated that we may be able to see more Shadow Hero in the future. And we did get a new Shadow Hero story last year for Free Comic Book Day.
All right, that was like a 2-page, 3-page thing, right?
Yeah. And so that's why I was wondering if we're going to get more of little stories like that, or maybe even subsequent books. But you say it's all a matter of time.
Yeah, because I think Gene definitely has ideas of what he wants to do for at least another volume or two. But yeah, we have to figure out the right time for it.
Now, you're going to be touring the United States in the very near future, correct?
Yeah, I'll be flying over in early April for Mokai and other events there. Yeah.
Okay. So for our listeners who may be in areas where you will be appearing, can you tell us what your agenda is? What places where you will be visiting? Where you'll be in the United States?
Let's see. I fly to New York first, and then from New York to, I think, Rhode Island, because I'm from RISD, so I'm going back to school to give a talk there. And then I think we're flying to San Francisco, Seattle, Austin, and then Arkansas, I think.
Okay. And you're going to be coming to Dallas.
That's right, yep.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it'd be fun. I've never been to that part of the U.S. before. I've only been to the East and West Coast, so it'd be fun.
Anywhere up near Kalamazoo where Gwen is? Michigan?
Michigan? Nope, never to Michigan.
How about Chicago?
I've passed by Chicago once. When I first went to art school, a friend of mine from Singapore came to visit, and we had this plan to drive all the way from Providence to Las Vegas. We only made it to Chicago and we turned back. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, Chicago has a really great comic scene, as you probably know, and I live about 2 hours from there. So the place I live, Kalamazoo, most people haven't heard of, but Chicago, most people do know. So you turned back, huh? It was just too much.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't have planned on it anyway. I think he had this plan to go gamble in Las Vegas to make a lot of money, but it was a silly plan.
That's a great story.
Well, Sonny, what else are you working on, or do you have plans on working on right now, or is Dr. Fate really consuming most of your time?
Dr. Fate is taking up most of my time in terms of the scheduling and deadlines, but I have sort of a rough idea of what I want to do for my next book. I'm very, very early stages, and I have to do a lot of reading and research to kind of figure out exactly what it's about.
Are we going to see any more Malinky robot stories?
not likely in the near future. I mean, I had a whole novel planned out a couple of years ago, but no one ever seemed interested in it, so I kind of put it in the back burner, and that's where it's kind of staying for now, I think. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it's a really busy time for you, but an exciting time too.
It is. I mean, when I first started doing Charlie Chan, I guess I was kind of aware that my so-called career was on sort of a plateau, and I was trying to figure out. I guess like most other creators, I have this dream that I can eventually make my so-called personal work also commercially viable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I'm trying to get at. I think to be able to do books that I want to do, and still be able to pay the bills. Yeah. So it's maybe getting there now. I'm not sure. A lot will depend on how Charlie Chan does it in the U.S. market, I think. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing book. So I'm telling all of our listeners, you need to get a hold of it. It's incredible. So
thank you.
Yeah. Well, Sonny, listen, thank you very much for being on the Comics Alternative and staying up late over there in Singapore to talk with us. We had a great time.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was fun. Thank you.
It was a pleasure, Sonny. Thanks.
Thanks, Gwen. Thanks, Derek.
Thank you.
Wow, Derek, that was an incredible conversation. I felt like I learned so much about this wonderful, beautiful, complicated comic, and I can't wait to teach it and to share it with everyone I know.
Yeah, it really is something worth seeking. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, the book just came out on March 1st, and you can get it at your local bookstore. You can order it online. So definitely see what the art of Charlie Chen Hock Chye is all about.
Right. And, Pantheon does, I hope we'll have a updated list of where Sonny's going to be, so that I know you're going to get to see him in Dallas. But I know he'll be at least in some of the major cities in the U.S. And I think everyone should try and meet him and get a hold of this great book.
Oh, definitely. And in fact, if our listeners wanted to get a copy of this new work, they could do so through our website. And in fact, if you go to comicsalternative.com/Amazon, you'll see a link for our Amazon Associates account. And if you click on that, you'll be taken to Amazon.com. You can do a search for Sonny's new book, and not just the new book, but any book of his. And if you purchase his books through that click-through of our Amazon Associates account, we get a few cents from Jeff Bezos. So that's it's great to get kickback.
Right, and to get a hold of this amazing comic. But Derek, if I were going to be sitting reading this comic, I might also want something to drink.
That's right. And that leads us to one of our sponsors of this episode. Remember, visit the website of Just Coffee Co-op. That's justcoffee.coop. And when you check out with your cart loaded up with coffee, tea, and chocolates, make sure you use the coupon code COMICS, and you'll get 10% off of your coffee order. That's Just Coffee Co-op. Also, our other sponsor of this episode is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com. You're going to find some incredible specials. And after you're all loaded up with caffeine and books, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about our interview with Sonny. If you go to the website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message through the wonders of SpeakPipe. It's a very simple and easy process. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way. Our phone number is 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. And, Derek, you folks can get in touch with us by email at 2guys@comicsalternative.com, or you can talk to us individually. I'm at Gwen@comicsalternative.com. Derek, how can people reach you?
Derek@comicsalternative.com. You can also reach us in a variety of ways via social media, such as Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes, as well as our reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog. And that's at our website, comicsalternative.com.
Right. Well, Derek, this has been a really great podcast. I've so enjoyed talking to Sonny and talking to you. And happy March. We are heading towards spring. So until next time, I'm Gwen.
And I'm Derek. We'll see you later.
See ya.